Yeah, so thank you for that. And definitely, yeah, housing is one of these issues well, is the issue that's at the top of my priority list. So if you can't afford to live in Santa Ana, we can call ourselves a sanctuary city, but if people are unable to actually live here and afford to live here, what kind of sanctuary are we? So the major issue that I always bring up is that there is a portion of this overall housing crisis that we have in California that is a supply issue. So we do have to build additional units. I think that what's scary in Santa Ana is that we're already a fairly dense city. We're park poor, and it is hard to balance out additional needs. We already have high levels of traffic and parking impacts. But at the end of the day, we still need to be able to actually create additional housing units. So I think that rent control is a very good step in the right direction for keeping people housed that are currently housed. But overall, oh, once you no longer or don't have a current unit, that's pretty tough to actually get into a brand new unit, right? So right now we're just seeing rates increase or rental rates increase at a steady level. So we are going to have to actually create new affordable housing. I think that having different types of housing is probably the best direction. So allowing for either kind of smaller studio units, still balancing that out with the creation of affordable family housing as well. It's pretty much a two-pronged strategy. But to do housing policy in a minute and a half, I think I have like 10 seconds left to say that the other thing that we really do need to do for renters locally is to have a legal defense fund so that we can actually implement and make sure that those laws are
Final thoughts.
yeah, those laws that are on the books are actually implementable by renters. So that's the one thing I would add for rental protection.
Great. Thank you for such a great critical question. As we all know, no one should be paying more than 30% of their income for housing. And unfortunately, we know that many folks in Santa Ana are paying even more than that. I think that the city has gone in the right direction in ensuring that there's rent control as well as the housing ordinance. And I think that if elected, one thing I would do is one, ensure that we maintain those, but also to discuss how do we actually increase living wages and having jobs, because the housing is one issue. We need to, like Manny indicated, we do need to build, but we also need to ensure that whatever is being built is currently for the community that's currently living here. And through that, that is the who. And then part of that is also ensuring that we have jobs, that folks have the income to actually sustain and continue to live here. So I think that's a two issue, both the housing, the need for supply, the need to protect current renters, and then also ensuring that we have economic growth to maintain that.
I'm going to agree with rent control is the beginning of it. We also need universal representation to make sure we're protecting our renters. Ward 2 has been heavily hit. My school where I work, we have 27% of our kids are houseless. And that's compared to most other schools are about 13 or less. We're getting hit hard and we're neglected by Nelida Mendoza and that area. We're behind 30 years on building. The state says you built enough, but like Manny has said before, we're behind on building affordable housing. But I believe not only do we have to build affordable rentals, but we have to be able to buy on city property. We should have affordable owner occupied where investors can't buy, and we buy it. We allow people to come in and buy at a low price with a discount. And then we'll be able to develop, because if we promote the land and put this under a covenant, then we will be able to sell condos for families, young people and elders to be able to buy homes, and their rent will never go up. They're paying a mortgage from then on out.
Great, thank you. First, I want to start off by saying that absolutely I would support this. And then I want to explain what I think we should be doing. One, when we talk about public safety, we often think about one very narrow definition. And public safety is really the protection of the general public. And that is both from the community as well as from people in power. And as we know, and we see the stats, use of force is heavily used on low SES and BIPOC communities, including Santa Ana. And if we look at the numbers, actually, I know that there's this conversation about high crime, but if you look at the stats, you see that there's actually a decrease in calls even this month. And there's a reported of 22 use of force. And I think one way we can address that is by ensuring that we have a clear understanding and transparency of why is there even use of force, what can be limiting of use of force, and also ensuring that we have accountability of how the funding is being spent. Because I do not feel that there's enough transparency to have an understanding of justifying for certain budgets. So I think that it's time for one to hold people in power accountable, and that includes the type of force that they're using, as well as accountability and the transparency in funding.
I'm in full support of having of holding the police accountable in Santa Ana. It's been a long time coming. We need to make this strong to support the folks who are going to be on the committee. The personnel commissioners are often threatened by folks, and we know they're made sure that that's the staff have told them that's a normal practice. We need to make sure those people are protected that are in this committee. We need to make sure that we have an investigator who's there. If anything happens, that they come and they're attacked or they're threatened anyway, that they are protected and the city does a full investigation to anything that happens. This has happened in the personnel commission to folks looking at police and matters in that way. And we have to make sure that we protect our people and not make it a common practice and give them the freedom to be able to subpoena and investigate the POA, the police, and do their due diligence.
Yeah, I think we're all supportive of this, and I am as well. However, I do, to Amalia's point, want to really broaden this out to a public safety oversight board. I think that if we limit the overall review of public safety and only being within the police department, I think we're missing out on a lot of aspects of what public safety is. So when it comes to police oversight and accountability, I do believe that the board should be doing that action directly, and I do believe that that would be one of the roles and responsibilities of the board. But we also have to start talking about actual deployment, the cost effectiveness of hiring officers. So, in a lot of cases, it ends up being that, the overtime costs are much greater. So we end up spending more money for less of an actual result when it comes to even just patrolling. So that is an issue, right? Like how cost effective are our actual public safety strategies and implementation of the tactics? Like how often are certain places patrolled? Do we have a robust network of investigators? How early are people retiring? What are the roadblocks to getting people from Santa Ana into these jobs? So, if we look on a department by department basis, we would probably see patterns where a lot of our police officers do not live in our community. So that's something where I think that the Public Safety Oversight Board really should be looking at the structural underlying issues of public safety overall and its effectiveness, and then making recommendations to the council. I also think that it might be time to consider, and this is just for consideration, I'm not swayed one way or the other, whether or not a direct police chief appointment would be kind of the next step, so that the city council itself would have a much greater, direct influence on the overall direction of the city's police force. So I do think that those are all areas that I think we should be looking at and into.
That mental health issue is wide, but we need to support our families and we need to support our youth. We need to make sure we have an investment in youth, and starting with ways to release or to catch on to their artistic and creative ways with centers that are free and not being charged at every corner. I know we're short libraries, and I think for elders and for young people, it's a necessity. We have 2 libraries. We're library poor in Santa Ana. We have 2, while Anaheim has 9 libraries. I know we have 1 library for every 175,000 people. Mental health issues, we can also help and support families outside of school, as schools are full with the mental health support. But how do we connect families and give holistic approach to mental health, with the whole family is supported? And how do we get those nonprofits who are doing the work in communication with the city and the school, so we support those folks? Because if you support just a student or one person or individual, that's not going to work out in our cities. So most times the issues are coming from with the family. So we need to support and look at mental health as a family issue. Supporting affordable housing is a big deal, and making sure we have great jobs. So these are all add to a better mental health, along with mental health services. So those are all the things I'm including under mental health.
Yeah, so this is definitely one of those issues that is a holistic issue. So it's not just relying on traditional mental health services, but looking at the way that people interact within a community. So for me, at the end of the day, mental health, positive mental health, does come from, from my perspective, being loved, cared for, and part of a community, right? Feeling as though you are part of this community of care and a larger sense of self. So what we see just in the world today is a bit more of atomization, folks that feel detached, that are no longer kind of as connected with each other. So in Santa Ana, what we would basically be doing is looking for ways, at least with youth, to make sure that all youth, regardless of where they are in life and kind of what their future goals are enrolled in some kind of after school, some kind of volunteer activity, some kind of support network, whether that's playing video games at the library or being part of a running club, but something where they feel that they're actually part of a greater community and where those interactions that really make a difference in someone's life happen. So those are the types of community of cares and kind of circles of mentoring that I practiced a lot when I was at the library. But what we're doing here even today, like when we're connecting between all these community orgs and the candidates, we're creating that community. And unfortunately, we see a lot of, well, we don't see all the current incumbents, that were either saying that they weren't going to be here, or just for whatever reason, miraculously, none of them showed up today. But when you don't have that sense of community, I think that that's one of the big things where mental health deteriorates, when you feel that you're alone and you really don't have that interaction with other people. So once we start talking to each other and interacting and volunteering and working together and alongside each other, I do think that those are all going to be helpful. And they're relatively low cost interventions that don't rely on medication.
I want to first start by also clarifying that mental health is very important, but it's also important to differentiate between mental health, behavioral health, and well-being. Those are three different things, and I think they're often lumped in together. But I think that, recently I had a family member that needed mental health services, and I was trying to work with the county, and to this day, we don't have an appointment. And I think we definitely need folks who, it's not just sufficient to have something translated in Spanish online, but like, how do we actually ensure that people who have language barriers are actually getting the appointments? And I think one way is by ensuring that the city has a coordinator that can work with the different diverse communities who speak different languages other than English, and ensuring that we're actually getting folks the services they need. In terms of well-being, general well-being, that I think most folks also definitely need, is ensuring that we have community centers. We don't have many for our seniors as well as our youth. I think that if we look at the budget, and if this is something that is definitely a need, then we need to really assess what is working, what is not, and where do we need to reallocate resources to things that are actually going to be beneficial for the entire community. So I definitely agree that mental health, behavioral, and well-being is very important. I think that we also need to ensure that we're differentiating these three different concepts so that we know how to address them for the community.
Yes, my youth organizing, I learned at a nonprofit and helped with start Raiz and that group that became Resilience and Boys and Men of Color and all that. But for youth this work, you need to get to students. So the city has to work with the school district. If you want to work with youth, you have to go where they're at. And you have to form a committee that they're on equal footing, not one on top of each other. They have to have respect for each other. So we have to come to an agreement to meet and have that and be able to work to get the word out. Whenever we have internships for youth, I always tell them, make sure they have a bus pass. And I think that's pretty good. And that's happening now, but they also need something to eat. If you want kids to sign up and they're going to go to work for the first few days, they have to have lunch. They have to be ready to eat. So make sure you have a meal plan for them as well. So working with the school district is easy. You put it out through all the teachers, you put it out through all the programs that are available to you, and you connect. And hopefully you have also have people meet at schools, show up and talk to each child one-on-one. Youth are not going to open up to a flyer or an open call. They're going to go up when you talk to them and you organize them one-on-one. So in order to attack more kids, get more kids, you're going to have conversations either at lunchtime, during classes, talk to them, make sure there's transportation, make sure they're being fed as well, because they're looking at their whole day and they're like, we don't have money for food. And we're going to be able to have to work somehow where if the school district can provide food up until, I think we can provide food at every school or most schools up until July and August and after that.
Thank you. It makes me really happy to see a large amount being targeted towards youth and really investing, right? Because youth is our future. I also really benefited from being part of a program when I was in high school. And so I think that it's also recognizing that sometimes the people who benefit from programs are people who are selected, right? If you behave well or do well, I did well in school, and therefore I had the opportunities like being in a PhD program right now. And so I think the question really is, how do we get other folks who are not your traditional quote unquote students that most people get access to? And I think that's kind of what you're getting at with your question. And I think one way is going into school and really engaging with the students, really going to diverse programming and ensuring that it's being offered. And I think also just talking to the parents, providing this and repeating information. But I think that we really need to ensure that we are letting all folks know that these are available and not just allowing certain people to select the type of students who get access to these type of programs, whether that's mobilization, going to the neighborhoods, because sometimes some students are not involved in organizations, and not because they don't want to, because they have other pressures at home. And so I think it's really diversifying. I know that I really love the model that Latino Health Access has with the promotoras, and really thinking, how do we apply that also with the youth?
Yeah, absolutely in agreement with the other folks here in that we have to have a solid partnership with the school district, and it can't just be about selecting the best and brightest. So one of the things that I always talk to people about is that each and every one of us that are here have something to contribute. We're all part of this community, and we have the innate human capacity to create, to give, to care, and that really what we're trying to really, at least for me, hone in on here with youth access to jobs is that we want to provide an equal access and opportunity and starting point for a lifelong story of success. For me, I started off as a volunteer with the Santa Ana, the City of Santa Ana's Parks and Rec Center. That got me over to the Santa Ana Public Library. I was extremely involved with the formation of the Santa Ana Teen Space program. And, I would say that without that program, I wouldn't have likely stayed in Santa Ana. That would have been something where I myself, as one of those positively tracked kids, I would have been told to go get a college degree and get out of the city as quickly as possible, and that was going to be our definition of success. So when we look to these particular programs, what we really, at least for me, would want to emphasize is that you can be successful in your own community, and that you can devote your life to creating positive change, and those are the types of opportunities that need to be granted to every single student, every single kid, every single person in our community. But you do need good data. You need to be able to say that, hey, maybe this person hasn't signed up for extracurriculars or has other issues, and maybe we should just go check in on them. And it shouldn't be like a negative thing. It should just be like, hey, we care. I want to see what your particular passion is, and we're going to be there for you. And the very least the thing that elected officials can do is show up. We can be there at these community events. We can be there with these kids. We should, at least I will definitely go to as many of the high schools and many of the middle schools as we possibly can to go talk to the students directly, to let them know about these opportunities. And I think that all of us here are committed to that vision of Santa Ana.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important. I think that, as we discussed before, our youth is really our next generation. And in my ward, there's like 3 environmental justice locations. And I think that in addition to the plan of just reducing and having renewable energy, I think there's this 2 different forms of environmental justice, right? Your main one is your overarching topic about reducing CO2 levels, and the other is the environmental topic of like, what do people in the community are breathing? And I think that already organizations are doing really good work in terms of the lead in the soil, right? There's already map and research that has determined where this is at, and the next step is really to just clean that, put the funding to clean that. And I think that the other important one too to acknowledge is the high asthma rates in a lot of Santa Ana. I myself, I'm born and raised here. I had asthma as a child. And I think that's something that we don't realize, that it's environmental, right? That is, you're not just born with asthma. For the most, this is something that is caused by whatever is currently in your environment. And so I think that prioritizing those 2, in addition to what's already been established, is highly important, and really redefining what that means. That is also what people are currently breathing, what kind of jurisdictions or businesses are emitting as well, right? We have that information. The state already has that for us to just access. And so I think that it is about using the data, but also thinking critically of how this is actually impacting the people who live here.
So I I don't necessarily know that there's ever enough that we can do. I think that when it comes to climate and environmental pollution issues and environmental justice, there is always going to be more that can be done. I think the question for me ends up being, what are the solid possible next steps that we can take? And the bare minimum that we have to do is to fund our existing climate action plan that the city has had for years and hasn't properly funded. We also need to do the same thing with the emergency climate resolution to look how we can actually implement the stated goals that we had. So all of these, all of the objectives in that policy and in not the ordinance, but in that resolution are very much possible within a 5-year time frame. So it's not like any of these things are impossible to do, but it does require additional resources, and that would be kind of at the top of my list as far as prioritization. And in Ward 6, we have very acute issues when it comes to lead pollution, heavy metal contamination, the release of toxins into the atmosphere, and a very slow response from the agencies that are supposed to take care of that. So historically, the city has basically said, it's AQMD's issue. We don't regulate air pollution, but then, you turn around and say, well, who at AQMD can I talk to? Well, here's their general line and their general number. That's not really the way that I want to see a city run. So I think that we should be way more proactive when it comes to environmental pollution being released into our neighborhoods and high density, low income communities of color that have been historically ignored and basically sacrificed on the altar of economic development. But, are we really going to, take years and away from people's lives in order to have just a little bit more of local economic production? That to me just seems like a completely unfair trade-off that our own residents are paying for. And again, with their own quality of life, with how many years they have to live on this planet, how many years they get to play with their kids, and the quality of life that those kids have. So there's absolutely more we can do there.
I'm in support of the new buildings and making sure everything is more forward towards the environment. But if we look at the lead, and I love that Amalia and Manny both talked about lead poisoning, but it's really affecting our youth and them growing up in the way of thinking and learning. It affects them, not only their health, but mentally, to stay focused, to learning, to being in classrooms. So we have to be really aggressive. It's not just like, hey, there's somebody working on it. We have to make sure we get into houses, we see where kids are at, we see this lead is really the hardest hit. And it's in central Santa Ana. It's hitting my youth in Ward 2, and as Manny's families too, from Delhi all the way to Henninger Park. We see the thickness here and around downtown Santa Ana. We have to take the lead out of the soil, and we got to make sure our kids are healthy and not being affected by it. So we have to take a stronger stand. We have to make sure this is leading the way moving forward, and clean up the land and make sure we protect children.